Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel, and in today's video we're going to compare two different approaches for having an empty state using HTMX and CSS. And we're going to compare both of these approaches by using first of all the CSS only approach, where we rely mostly on CSS to show an empty state inside a list, and then we'll also see how we can do the exact same thing by not using CSS at all to accomplish this, but rather using HTMX only. We have this simple example with a list of tasks, the ability to create a new task and also delete a task. And after we delete all the tasks from our list, we want to see this message that says no tasks were created yet. We'll start with the CSS example, and if you want to take a look at this code, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below to the GitHub repo, and you can check out this branch for this CSS example. For the routing and the templating, we'll be using Go and Temple. We have three different routes. First, this one that will render the list of tasks on the initial render. Then we have this route that will grab the ID from the path and delete the task from the list. And finally, we have this route that will create a new task and insert it into the list. Inside the temple file, we have three different templates. First, we have this one that we'll use to render the tasks on the initial load of the page. And here we get the most important part when it comes to having an empty state using CSS only. We have first of all this wrapper div element, and inside of it we have this empty card template that we'll take a look at in just a second. Then we want to range through each one of the tasks and render a row. The row component is pretty simple. We want to take in as an argument a task. We want to add this div with the following ID, and inside of it we render the task name and then a button that will allow us to delete the task. And the thing here is that we want to specify the target of this button, this task ID. So this is the exact same one that we have here. The only difference is that we need to add the £sign before. And then the swapping strategy is going to be hx swap delete. So we want to delete this target that we specify here. And then we want to make a request with the delete method to /tasks and then / the ID of the task. And by doing this, HTMX will take care of removing this from the DOM without us having to do anything else, and we don't even need to return anything back from the server. So if we take a look here at the main.go file again, as you can see, when we hit this endpoint using the delete method, we grab here the ID from the path and then we only delete the task and we don't need to do anything else because HTMX again is going to take care of removing this from the DOM. And finally, the reason we are calling this approach for an empty state a CSS way of doing things is because we'll be using the following strategy. We'll be having here this empty card that we want to include inside of this wrapper div element, and we'll then have by default the class of hidden using Tailwind CSS. So by default, when we render this, it will not be shown inside of the DOM. And if this is the last element, then we want to apply this class of block. And this essentially means that if this is not the last element inside of this wrapper div, then we don't want to show it. And if it is the last, then we want to show it. Meaning that when we remove all of our tasks from the list, then this will be the last element inside of this wrapper div element, and then it will show with this message that says that no tasks were created. But before we continue, if you want to learn more about how to build web applications with HTMX, Go, and PostgreSQL, then go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below. As you can see here inside of the browser, we have this div element here with the message that says no tasks were created, but at the moment it doesn't appear here inside of the page. But if we try to remove all of the tasks, so let's delete here all of our 4 tasks, as you can see, now we see this message that says no tasks were created. And if we try to add a task back into the list, the empty state will disappear and we'll see only the list of tasks again here inside of the browser. Now let's see how we would do the exact same thing. So we want to again have a list of tasks and then an empty state, but in this case we want to rely on HTMX instead of CSS. So if you want to follow along this example, make sure that you move to the HTMX branch. And again, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below to the GitHub repo. And here we have again 3 different routes. We have this one that will render the initial list of tasks, which is the exact same thing as we had previously. Inside the delete route, we not only want to grab the ID from the path and delete the task, but we also want to re-render the list of tasks again. And then we want to render this rows component. And then inside of the route that will allow us to create a task, we don't want to do what we were doing previously. Previously, we were creating a task and then returning it back from this route. But instead, we want to add here the task. Then we want to grab the list of tasks down here and finally render it down here. So previously, we were returning only one row from this request, and then HTMX would take care of inserting that at the bottom of the list. In this case, we want to grab the entire list again, and we want to send it back to the browser. To be able to accomplish this, we want to again have this empty state template, but instead of looping through each one of the rows inside of the template, we want to create here a new rows template that we were using previously inside of our routes. And inside of it, we want to define here this wrapper element. And then we want to add some logic here that says that if the length of the tasks is 0, or in other words, if we don't have any tasks available to us here, we want to render the empty card. And if not, we want to range through each one of the tasks and render them by using the row component. And if we take a look at the empty card template again, we don't have any kind of classes that will allow us to either show this or hide it based on the fact that it is the last element inside of the div. And this means that we are not anymore relying on CSS to show an empty state, but rather on HTMX only. And also, if we take a look at the button that will allow us to delete a task, as you can see, the target now is the ID of tasks instead of being a task row only. Then the swapping strategy is going to be outer HTML, and we still call the exact same endpoint using here the delete method, and the endpoint is going to be /tasks /the ID of the task. And by doing this, we are going to replace this entire element with the response that comes back from the server. So if we take a look again here at the main.go file, we are going to first grab here the ID from the path and delete the task. Then we want to list all of our tasks, and finally we are going to render this rows component. Now inside the browser, if we try to delete a task, and if we take a look here at the request, the response includes 3 different tasks, the task 1, the task 2, and the task 3, and that's the exact same thing that we see here inside of our page. And then if we continue deleting until the last one, we now see this empty state message, and that's the exact same thing that we get back from the server. So now the server takes care of letting us know if this is the last request or not. And since it is, we now see here this message that says no tasks were created. And just like with the previous example, if we try to add a new task back into the list, we are going to get this back from the server with the task that was just inserted. And if we try to add another one, we are going to see the exact same thing. As you can see, it is pretty simple to show an empty state using either CSS or HTMX, and both of these methods are valid. You can use either of them inside of your web application. It really is up to your preference, and then also to the level of complexity that you prefer. So if you go with the CSS approach, it is going to be a bit more complex when it comes to our requests, but it is going to be also more performant since we don't need to return a list of tasks each time that we either delete one or add a new task. And then with the HTMX approach, it is going to be simpler since we don't have to think about inserting a new item at the bottom of the list or different CSS classes, but it is also going to be a bit less performant. Now, if your lists are not that long, then it is not going to be much of a difference, but again, these are the pros and cons of both of these approaches. So with this being said, I hope the video was helpful to you, and I'll see you on the next one.